Nick, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Chris.
So, can you tell myself and the audience a little bit back about who you are and what you do?
Gladly. My name is Nick Smart. I am the director of blockchain intelligence and data for Crystal Blockchain. We're a blockchain intelligence company. What that means is we analyze transactions on the blockchain for suspicious activity and provide that as an alert to our clients, and also help things like law enforcement track and trace funds on the various blockchains that exist. About myself, I guess I've been in crypto for about 4 years now. I'm a late comer to the space. Before that, I worked in like IT security roles, and I was in the British military for 12 years.
So, what got you interested in going into the crypto space, blockchain space?
Um, I'll be honest. I started as a very much a massive cynic, and I think that's my general life outlook is of pessimism, which is always great for people around you. And certainly, working in intelligence, it sometimes pays to be a bit pessimistic. But crypto specifically, yeah, I walked away from it. I didn't like a lot of the noise that was going on in the space to begin with. I thought there was lots of outlandish claims being made. But my sort of wake up call moment and what really got me interested in the technology was the successful cooperation between law enforcement agencies taking down a child pornography website called Welcome to Video. And there is some really fantastic write-ups of that in various books, which I strongly recommend people read. Traces in the Dark, I believe it's called. It's definitely worth your time if you haven't read it.
Cool. So, we're talking about fraud recovery scams. So, let's kind of talk a little bit about the fraud, and then we'll talk about recovery scams and kind of how to navigate between the two.
Mhm.
So let's yeah. So what are some of the scams? What are they targeting people that are victims of?
Okay, so we've got to put a sort of start at the origin is like why does crypto have this reputation for scams and fraud? Well, like often you hear lots of perceived high return on investments. So very people are sensitive to financial climate. There's patchy regulation globally, so people aren't always protected, or there is no potentially there's no supervision of the activities, which might cause people to go into it and think, okay, whatever else. And the technology is not really that well understood widely, and there's lots and lots of financial jargon thrown around it. So there are lots and lots of crypto scams and opportunities for criminals to take advantage of people by using a combination of these different factors. And I'm sure there are plenty more, but it's regulation, technology, and this idea of a high return on investment.
Hmm.
For a fund recovery scam is and anyone can fall victim to these scams. Anybody can sort of like get locked into it because there'll be an ad on a social media post, or a friend might refer to you, or you might be introduced to someone on a dating website and they'll start talking to you about it. Any number of ways it happens. And people fall victim to it, and that just happens. What then happens is you get indexed in a list by the criminals, and you get targeted again for a fund recovery scam. And these are particularly nasty because not only have you been deceived once by the fraudster, you're now going to be deceived a second time, and they're going to take more money from you when you're potentially desperate to get it back. And it's particularly nasty, particularly for people who've been affected. Like it's a very difficult thing to get away from.
So how do these let's use a real world example of something that will probably result in and if it has not already, a lot of recovery scams. The FTX collapse.
Okay.
So there's plenty of, for those who haven't read about it, there's plenty going on in the news about FTX and their collapse and how they allegedly, most likely, mismanaged a lot of their funds, and resultingly there was a run on the bank, and the organization collapsed with what was the number, about $4 or $5 billion in
Yeah.
missing assets, something to that
Yeah.
extent.
Yeah.
So you've got $4 or $5 billion that people want to get a piece of.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people are impatient with crypto because the price is volatile and people want to act quickly and they want to take their money now from the exchange. People are desperate. So if and you often see it, and FTX aside, whenever there's a major incident in crypto, if there's like a theft, if there is like a widespread scam, or if there's like an action like what happened at FTX, or Terra Luna, I think happened before then as
Yeah.
well. Fairly quickly afterwards, particularly on social media platforms and generally on Twitter, because that's where a lot of crypto is discussed. You will start seeing in responses to the announcement by FTX or the announcement by the operator of the site that was hacked. We'll get your money back for you, my friend. Cyber Chris, and he'll get your money back. There is actually one called Cyber Chris. I must say, it's not actually you. I don't think.
I hope not.
Do you know what I
Let me
mean?
be very clear. It is not me.
Yeah, but there are lots and lots of like people who jump up straight away and sort of like these. We would describe them as ambulance chasers. Do you know what I mean? Like the old injury compensation lawyers, the same kind of idea. Like we'll come and help you get your money back. But we need to sort of unpack slightly of how desperate people are to return their money. And you do read horror stories about people who've lost it all for the market, but this is another type of issue where still like they've staked money, which technically at least to them, they're still eligible to get back. But
Yeah.
if now, like we've got rent payments, we've got college to pay for, we've got, maybe co-payment on a big medical bill to do. We need the money now. So somebody's, you've created this sense of urgency in a victim, which in a lot of other frauds, the criminals work really hard to do is try and convey a sense of urgency. They don't have to work so hard here because they've already got one.
Yeah.
Like you're already desperate. And I also think like it's proportional to the individual's own income. When we were discussing it this, in the sidelines of our conversation, what's odd about scams or what's particularly nasty is the value of the scam is proportional to its victim, and
Yeah.
whereas for some people who are wealthy, like they may not miss $400 or $500 in a fraud, like they might turn it off and okay, fine, well we're not going to treat ourselves to a couple of fancy meals or a weekend break this month, like however your life goes. But for some people, that might be the difference between feeding their children or not.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like these front fraud recovery things really have that. They've already got the motivation to go to them and already to get the money back. And if we work back to the factors we talked at the start about the lack of or the general patchy regulation, not necessarily a lack, particularly on consumer protection, and the lack of understanding of the technology, it's very easy for somebody who's offering the ability to recover funds to say, "Hey, I've got your solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, private key cracking. Yeah, I can do that." Irrespective of even with like the advances in modern computers and the incredible speeds of supercomputers, which would still take hundreds of thousands of years to crack the encryption used on a Bitcoin private key, they'll claim to do the same thing with their MacBook Pro. And it's don't get me wrong, I'm an Apple fan, but it's not that good, man. You can't do it. But again, they can rely on the fact that people don't know,
Yeah.
and that's really what comes out here. And it's a wider problem with the internet as well. People don't understand DNS poisoning. They don't understand about redirects or ad poisoning or that kind of stuff. They don't understand what's going on. They just think something's happened and they can't tell it. But in the fund recovery scams, they've already got a captive audience who's desperate, might be a very desperate person. Imagine that scenario. You've lost $500 on FTX. That was, you thought you were going to turn it into $700 and that half that money's for your food. Now, how do I eat? What
Yeah.
do I do? People are really desperate, and that's how these guys work. They're ruthless.
Yeah, I mean, the keys I always look at is there's the urgency, there's emotion and authority. After a crypto exchange crash, you've got the urgency. I've got to pay my bills. You've got the emotion because I've lost all this money. Someone just has to come along and say, hey, I'm an expert in a field that you know
Yeah,
nothing about,
yeah. I
and
mean, honestly,
they've got it.
it's really well understood, isn't it? When they say, when everyone's like, you know, whenever there's like a major incident, like you instantly look for somebody in a uniform. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just
Yeah.
built into you. Like when a building's on fire, you don't care if it's a police officer, if it's a firefighter, a paramedic. It could be anybody in a uniform. It could be a blooming McDonald's worker. Like you'd still look to them for a figure of authority to tell you what to do, and you'll listen to it because you're so desperate. And I feel that's the thing there. I mean, there are some other ways why this is more effective too. You know, we have the desperation aspect. It's also the fact that, you know, law enforcement's still catching up to, you know, not necessarily how to investigate this because they're much better than they were at the outset, but you know how to do this under legislation, how to take on these people who are doing it, you know, and there's lots of motivation for a victim to look for a non-official source,
Yeah.
particularly if it looks like an easy win. And also, you know, in some cases they might be suspicious of law enforcement. You know, like it might not sit in their ideology that they want to, you know, go to the police to get the money back, but rather get help from outside for whatever reason. And again, all of this is just more in the toolkit of the crypto fraud recovery teams. Is that
Yeah.
okay? We can really build it up.
I mean, honestly, if someone came to me and said, "Hey, I lost, $100, $500 in a crypto for let's specifically say a crypto fraud," I wouldn't tell them to go to law enforcement
No,
because it's such a small amount of money that at least here in the U.S., even if the police knew what to do and had a crypto unit, um, likely that's not enough money to interest them, and so I don't know that anyone would even suggest going to law enforcement. But so I mean, it makes sense that people would look for alternative venues.
yeah, and also this is idea too is that, you know, um the like the seizures and the other legislation that law enforcement would use in various jurisdictions, because that regulation and the legislation hasn't quite caught all of the things yet, and it's still new law. Maybe it also means that, you know, maybe they're unwilling to go for any sort of action themselves. And you know, we do have lots of, you know, understanding that this is the case.
Yeah.
You know, they just don't know yet.
And so are these kind of recovery things specific to the crypto space, or do they follow kind of as a result of other criminal activity?
No, they've been around for quite a while. I mean, I think as long as the fraud has been happening, the fund recovery has been sat alongside it, and things like binary options trading or forex trading that's been, you know, frauds. There are plenty of other services that sprang up, mostly probably operated by the same people. I think, ironically, um, have sprung up in the background to offer this kind of support. The main difference with the cryptos recovery options is we now don't just have, you know, we're attorneys and we have paperwork and we're investigators and we'll find it for you. We don't need to use that narrative entirely. I can now use a hacker for hire. You know, like we've got this guy who's, you know, he's inside the matrix. He can do it all. You know, he's the absolute everything. He can just get your crypto back through technical stuff.
Yeah.
Like I even saw one advert once for a crypto recovery service that claimed expertise in C++ programming, which is fantastic. You know, he's clearly one of the high level languages, you know, but he still has some serious skills there. I never put that on a recovery thing, but again, you know, people don't know what that means. Oh, he's a C++ programmer. Well, he clearly must know what's going on. And you know, you Google C++ and you see what's written, and you're like, oh wow, okay, this must be something that's going to be good. But yeah, that's the two sides. There are these professional. I say professional. I mean that in the loosest use of the term, but recovery services that say, "Oh, we can do the lil for you and we can get the money back." And they do have very convincing websites and very legitimate looking domains and emails and registrations and so on and so forth. But again, they ask for money and it's never returned. The same goes for the hacker for hire. They really like to put it out there. You know, lots of videos of, like, you know, dark screen and scrolling green text, and you know, someone's just probably running like a port scan or on, you know, the whole internet to see what comes out to make it look interesting, or that kind of stuff. They're pretty common, but the way they fish for their prey is very different. Whereas the fund recovery, like professional recovery services, will be more, they'll show up in AdWords, and that kind of stuff. They'll be there as a listing on Google or something. The hacker for hire, generally what they'll do is they'll post a statement on one platform, like, so for example, my MetaMask wallet got hacked, and I write down Twitter, and then someone will find it, and then they'll say, oh, by the way, you want to speak to my friend, this guy, Tim the hacker or whatever his name is, and he'll find you. Here's his Instagram.
Yeah.
And then you go to the Instagram, and then there's an email address, and you can contact them, and then you can start losing your money all over again, which is really quite sad, to be honest with you. And the other thing as well is that when they claim to do the fund recoveries, particularly for the technical ones, you're also then giving them access to your whole device potentially. There's probably going to be some malware left on your device, or they're probably going to use other tricks they have up their sleeves, like other forms of social engineering, to get you to do bank transfers, or even just to steal the credentials from your devices, which is the other way they hit you. It's not only you're going to lose money from the crypto scam, and not only you're going to pay these guys to help you, but you're also going to be attacked again and again and again.
Yeah.
And they really don't care. And some of them are very convincing. They even have video testimonials where they've clearly paid somebody on a gig working platform to record something saying how great they are, and it's all lies just to feed the narrative.
I mean, it's funny. Anytime I do an episode and we talk about crypto in one shape or form, on the YouTube videos down in the comments, there will inevitably be a post about, hey, get a hold of so and so on Instagram, and he can help you recover your funds. It's amazing how fast those comments appear, and how consistently those comments appear. Get them on, get them in the comments on the post on Instagram, pointing them to Twitter accounts, and vice versa.
Even in so there are some really fantastic websites out there, that do community monitoring of cryptocurrency addresses. So say you could put an address into search, and you'll get a result from like Bitcoin abuse, or chain abuse, which is another one, a TRM product. You'll get like these things out there, and they'll tell you that, oh, this address has been used in a fraud, and it's like brilliant. But in Bitcoin abuse as well, the fund recovery guys are posting there too.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So like I could so clearly that's where they're going after the victims again, is like you search for your cryptocurrency deposit address, like where you sent the money to, and then all of a sudden there you go again. We've now got one more time to say, right, we've got more money from you.
And so we were talking a little bit before we started recording. You've done some research into kind of some of the recovery websites, and we were talking about there's this thought that cryptocurrency is 100% anonymous, it's untraceable. Public view of cryptocurrency it's just this. You put money here and it pops out some random place somewhere else in the world, and no one can see what's going on. It's entirely a black box, but that's not entirely correct, right?
No, it's not. And what we have to sort of drill into here is, if anybody understand the stages of money laundering, like, I'll use a reference to like terrorism financing. We have like raise, store, move, spend. Right, those are like the four pillars of terrorism financing, or any particular criminal activity. It's just how the raise is different, and what it's spent on might be slightly different. And when you look at the crypto asset scams, we have raise, so we do the scam. Store, wherever it gets stored, it gets moved between various different parties, paying off people they have to. And then let's talk about spend. So I want to convert cryptocurrency into a luxury good or service. In order to do that, I'm probably going to need currency, as in fiat currency, because that's still what's mostly required. And most places that will allow you to convert your cryptocurrency into fiat currency will have controls around that. There will be, by insistence of their financial partners, there will be insistence that KYC is done, and there are AML processes and so on and so forth. So it's difficult at that stage to sort of like do the cash out phase. Which I guess is like the main all of this, is to try and get fiat currency from the crypto that you take in the first place. why is this important? Is because, well, when you do the raise phase, when you're at the, I don't mean to rhyme on purpose, but at the raise stage of that sort of like process, you're distributing to your victims the address you want to receive payment in. And then every movement in that chain onwards, if it's written to a public blockchain, and there are private ones, so there's Monero, for example, which is privacy enhanced, which you can't track between 2 points. But certainly for Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the major like Tron or big crypto or big well-known blockchains, you can follow it between different points and you can see where it goes up to. So we can track from the point of raising all the way through to where it gets converted. And it's this area of conversion where there is opportunity for, us to learn potentially who was behind it. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't, as in the criminal can't come up with ways of getting around that. And for, time eternal, they've found ways of deceiving financial institutions about who the real person doing business is. It's not like we've now tracked the money and, we don't need to do KYC anymore. We still need to do that. And we still need to keep on top of them. We still need to watch out for fraud at that end. But, the point is we can link a payment from one location to another. And when we look at the scale of how these operations generally work, we aren't looking at in some cases they are highly sophisticated, but the bread and butter ones, the ones that are most common, are typically smaller sites with that may last for a few weeks before they either get taken down or they haven't got enough victims. And they collate maybe $3,000 or $4,000, and then they funnel this money into like a few clusters of addresses, and then that gets sent on forward. It's possible to start drawing these things together. It's possible to start linking together groups of individuals and activity thanks to the blockchain, really. And I think, for those who have, you can doubt the technology, and there are some fairly convincing arguments about why the technology is not thing. But if you doubt the idea that, well, we can actually track a payment from a victim to a wallet, and then we might be able to detect other victims, and we might be able to find sites belonging to other people we didn't even know about. That's a really powerful way of looking at this, and it does fly in the face of the anonymity. It's not anonymous; it's pseudo-anonymous. But we also know at some stage they're going to want to swap it to something else. They're going to want to get the fiat currency. You can't. I mean, you can in some places, but it's very difficult to go and buy a house entirely in crypto assets. And even if you do, you're going to ask a lot of questions like, where does this money come from? And if you're real estate agents using a tool, like a transaction monitoring tool, transaction monitoring tool, they're going to reject your money. So you still need to go through a laundry process to do that.
I mean, even if you were, I'll let you use Tesla is accepting Dogecoin. I think at some point you could actually buy a car with what you can't currently, but let's say you could. It's not like if the criminal bought a Tesla and the FBI goes to Tesla and says, who bought this car? We see this transaction. Of course, Tesla's going to turn over the information.
Yeah, of course it is. And I think, one of the things we could say about the crypto asset industry generally is it's hyper scrutinized, I think. And I don't say that lightly. Like, we scrutinize, our financial institutions, but a lot of it is opaque. And we only find out about what's been going on and who they've been receiving money from after the fact. There's some fairly severe penalties for money laundering. For example, for Danske Bank and Deutsche Bank and HSBC, to name but three, and many other international banks have had heavy penalties for money that have come from dubious sources. And they had KYC programs, they had compliance programs, but they still got caught. The reality is with crypto is we can see very quickly which exchanges are receiving money directly from drug marketplaces or child pornography websites or just general frauds, and that does mean it's hyper transparent. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that means that there's more work on the exchanges fronts to be better. Like, if they really want to be in the respected institutions that they are, that they need to be on top of it. But I think, it is a hyper transparent industry. The blockchain is the blockchain. The announcement, I think it was last week, of Bitslato, which was a Hong Kong headquartered cryptocurrency exchange that was mainly serving Russian users. You could look on the blockchain, and if you have an analytics tool, you can see where the money's come from. You can see they received a large amount of payments from, Hydra Marketplace, a prolific Eastern European, CS region drug marketplace. You can see that they receive money from ransomware groups. We can also read on dark web forums between criminals talking to each other in Russian that actually we like Bislato because we can get past their KYC. We just send them some fake documents and they let us go. Like, even though they've known the transactions come from a bad place, they just ignored it. It's out there, and I think that's what's kind of sad about crypto more broadly is it is a transparency tool. Like, and public trust can be improved by transparency. Like, we know that from corporate ownership records, right? But we also need to maybe, I wouldn't say give them an easy time, but I think maybe we need to stop shouting it's all drugs, it's all illegal, it's all everything else, when we can see that they're actually working really hard to do something about this.
Just for clarity for those who are listening, I know the term, but what does KYC stand for in the banking institution?
Okay, so KYC is know your customer, and at its most primitive description, it would be providing identity documents and some sort of proof of your salary or your income to the bank. What this is used for is to basically build up an idea of who you are as a client, so the bank knows what to expect from you. The financial institution knows what to expect from you. So, if I go into a private bank and I bring in my payslip and I bring in my identity documents, they've got a record that was me, and then this is how much money I have. If I suddenly, if I say that I'm an office cleaner, and I make $2,000 a month, let's say, if I suddenly start having payments of $20,000 into my bank account every month, they're going to ask what the hell's going on, right?
Yeah.
And at its most primitive, that's what KYC is and what it's used for. It's like to understand who your client is.
And that's to prevent, basically a system to reduce fraudulent transactions and things like that.
It's to coin like a cybersecurity way of looking at it, there are things, right? You buy a firewall. What does it do? Well, it keeps baddies out, but it also helps you detect them when they're in. So the firewall might stop most attacks, but you also want to have some good logging and monitoring in the background that says, if something does happen, we know where they've been, we know what they've done. And KYC is kind of like that too, is that, okay, not only is it good for maybe acting as a low-level deterrent, because like fake IDs happen and stolen IDs also happen, it's also effective in, okay, if something does happen and we get asked a question, we can start providing information on who this person might have been and what they were doing on our platform.
So for someone who's listening who has lost money to a romance scam, they've lost money, let's just say on FTX. They've lost money on FTX or some other exchange which has crashed, and they hear someone saying, hey, I can help you get a portion of your money back. What should they do?
I mean, engage cynicism and pessimism and take it with a pinch of salt. I think one of the first things also that they should do, and I think anybody involved in countering fraud or discussing fraud needs to be aware of, is we need to try and lift the stigma of shame around people who've been victim. And I think the romance fraud is a really good example. So people who've been fooled in romance frauds, and they've been stung, they've basically learned to trust somebody and formed an emotional connection with them to the point where they're happy to part with money. They may have been lonely, they may have world a lot of things in this relationship, and now they've discovered that not only is the person who was doing it not acting in their best interest, they're now, they've stolen their money too, which is, deprived them financially. We really need to try and lift this stigma around it. So what I'd say, if you've been a victim, is, speak up, report it, tell people who can help. And the best way you can do that, I would say, in crypto, is move fast, report it on, the chain abuse, blockchain abuse websites, and so on and so forth. Like, put the thing out there and say, this is what's happened, advertise what's going on. Also keep records of what happened. Complain to you if it was on a dating app or platform, like let the provider know this is what's going on. Maybe they can do something about the account, but also preserve the evidence. And then also, when it comes to fund recovery options, the first things first is I'll dispel a couple of technical myths that go out there. it's not possible to hack a private key. Like you can't get control of a private key to then redistribute the funds back to your account. Like it's not going to happen that way. The way in which a recovery would usually work is we'll identify where the money's gone to, and then it will be stopped there, or it'll be noted that it's there. And when it does try to move again, then we can do something about it. And that's generally how a recovery works. I wouldn't want to recommend specific services or providers. Many blockchain intelligence companies, including ours, have an investigations team. It's generally provided at cost, like you have to pay for that service. But we're a company that has tools, technology, and skills to do this. There are cowboys out there who will claim to do the same thing, and generally, there's nothing to stop them at the moment. There's no charter, or there's no block in place to stop them from working that way. My first protocol to that, and the other thing to do as well is, of course, speak to your law enforcement, speak to local law enforcement, tell them what's happened, make sure you put a record down on there, and maybe something can be done. I think the other thing too is that it won't be a fast process, and I think I don't have tons of experience in asset recovery myself. It's not my forte, but certainly from many of the people I've spoken to in the industry and I've met since being in crypto assets, is that asset recovery is not a fast process. It takes a long time in traditional asset recovery, locate the assets, but in crypto's case, get the law to go through, to get the courts to do what they need to do. It is possible, but it does take time, and maybe that's the thing there. Yeah.
And I suppose another one would be, let's using FTX as an example. The U.S. government has stepped in and has seized some assets and has said we will be returning some of those assets to some people under specific circumstances. The government is not going to ask you to pay the FBI in order to get a portion of your assets. So if it's anyone approaching you from a government and saying, give us money so we can release your assets to it, that's definitely a scam.
Yeah, exactly. To be honest, you already pay the FBI. If you pay taxes, you've already paid their salaries, right? So they don't need any more money for you to do their job. You've already made your investment with those guys, and that's really how it is. There are private companies that do that. There are law firms, and something that we are advocating for is more class action against frauds, particularly the lower level frauds. The more people who get involved in a class action, the potentially, the more likely you are to get smaller amounts of money back in part of a bigger deal. And I do think a lot of it comes down to like civil courts rather than criminals. We have to, be pragmatic maybe and think that as much as we want to send the guys who are doing this to prison, some of them sit in jurisdictions we can't get near to.
Yeah.
And a more pragmatic view is, okay, well, maybe we can get your money back at least, and that will be done through a civil recovery or a civil, prosecution. That does come with cost. That does come with, again, more time and more resources. It's not going to be, if you, again, we go back to our example of losing $500, that's going to cost you a lot more than $500 to do a civil recovery, right? It's going to cost a lot more, and it'd be more than you would want to. You'd spend a lot more than the 500 you lost in the first place. It was not, the economics don't work. But if there are enough of you, and somebody takes us on as, okay, how many of these frauds can we link together? How many of these people of these websites, how many of them we can draw together as one big group? Maybe something can then be done at that level, and say, okay, right, that's that. And I'll also add too is that exchanges are quite responsive to frauds. They're a dedicated investigations team in all the big regulated or at least attempting regulated exchanges. Like they all have pretty good stuff. They are the household names. They are the Krakens, the Coinbase, the Binances. Like they really are. They resource this properly, because again, as an industry, it's existential crisis. Like if everyone says everything about cryptocurrency is a scam continuously, this factory repetition. We had it 5 years ago when cryptocurrency was drugs, and cryptocurrency is now fraud. I don't know what it'll be next, but it'll be something. But just saying something over and over again doesn't make it true. And exchanges will work with you or will try and help you if they know the money's come to them. So if an address belongs to Binance or Coinbase or Kraken, you can tell them, and I can't say on their behalf like what they'll do, but they're generally quite responsive to your complaints. Like they're not just going to walk away from it because they know the problems.
Yeah, they have an interest in self-regulating.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a market that's had a kick for trust, mainly due to a couple of fairly big incidents last year with the Terra Luna collapse and what's happened with FTX, where the market then has lost trust, like they're incentivized to try and rebuild it.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, they know full well that you can't just ignore your clients or ignore people who've got complaints to you. You need to cooperate. And from our side, we see that they generally do. But again, individual experiences may vary. I
Yeah.
don't know. I want to comment on any circumstance specifically.
So earlier you talked about reducing the stigma of fraud and cybercrime victims. So I've been trying to do a better job of it and asking my guests, have you been a victim of fraud or cybercrime?
Um, Directly myself, no. I think I'm very fortunate, but now I've said that, I'm going to probably have something come my way. I'll knock on wood and see how we get on. But I do remember an incident. We were doing a presentation to a group of regulators from a national bank. My colleague was setting up a demonstration, and he wanted to show how a mixer worked. So we thought we would show practically how it worked by sending, a small amount of money to a known mixing service, and then see it get mixed, and then watch how it goes around or whatever else. Turns out that the money he sent, the place he sent the money to, wasn't an actual mixer; it was a fraud, and he lost his $40 or whatever else in front of a room full of people who you're trying to impress with a well rehearsed demonstration, and it's like, actually this was a fraud all along. How do we not know this? It looked kind of silly, and I'd also know through it happens to the best of us. Like
Yeah.
nobody's immune to this. It the crooks have always got some way of enticing you in. Everyone's got a particular thing that they'll just keep prodding until they find it.
Yeah, it's kind of the same way that you look at anti-terrorism and terrorism. The terrorists only have to get it right once, but
Yeah,
the people that are affording the protection, you have to get it right 100% of the time.
yeah, you can't miss, right? Because the impact to you for getting it wrong is far greater cost than whatever happens on the other side. But and I think it's an interesting parallel too to use the word terrorism, because to be fair, fraud has a lot of the hallmarks of how
Yeah.
terrorism works, right? People are generally frightened, like especially fund recovery, like they're frightened into activity, like they're terrified of, I'm never going to get my money back. I go back to our example. We talked about the person, romance for investment fraud. They call it pig butchering now. I think that's disgusting. I think it's a really horrible term. Again, we're now insulting the victims. We're not being compassionate at all about them. I understand it's easy to say and it's not as nice as romance for investment fraud, or confidence fraud, or whatever you want to call it. But let's be nice to the people who've had this happen to them, please. The the thing in those particular instances is, these people feel genuinely affected,
Yeah.
and that they aren't gonna just sort of like walk away from it. Like it's not going to be something that's going to, they're generally upset about everything that's happened to them, and we just have this heaped onto. They've lost twice. They've lost a relationship and they've lost money, and how do you recover from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge that most people don't understand, that there's two aspects to being a victim of a fraud or a scam. There's the financial cost, and then the emotional, relational cost. That
Hmm.
okay, yeah, I may be able to afford to lose the monetary amount, but now I've got this innate distrust of people. I've
Yeah,
I told my family members, no, it couldn't possibly be a scam. Now I've, put a
they've all
wedge in my
lost money.
relationships, and
Yeah,
there's a lot of cascading issues.
you just remind me of another story about like loss of trust. It's not related to cryptocurrency. So my parents are quite old. They're not that old, but they're old. And the bank that they use back in the UK, they changed their website. and they had been consuming like all these reports of like, they're out to get you, whatever else.
Yeah.
They went to the length of on a tablet taking the website into like a brick and mortar branch, like the actual building, to show the teller, is this what your website looks like now? Because they were that frightened of
Hmm.
being defrauded again. And this is the kind of impact this is having on people's behavior. It makes you frightened. And as you said, you know, do you trust anyone again? Like, what happens? How am I gonna get out of this? How am I gonna, rationalize this to myself? As you said, a lot of the frauds that happen generally, I'm sure you're aware, like affect communities of people, right? So it'd be like a religious group, and particularly if you're like a minority group, you might, you might have a stronger trust with your friends and family. You might be recommended a fraud from a friend and you trust them because they're part of your group or whatever else. And what happens when it's unearthed? Like, what happens when it's found out? All that trust is broken. Like, all of a sudden, it's like, you were the one who told us all it was going to be all right. You were the one who said we were going to be, making money and we were going to have
Yeah.
a great life. And now you're the villain. I mean, I have heard a story from last week of somebody who took their own life because of a romance fraud,
Yeah.
because of the situation they're going into. Like, this isn't little. And I think also, it's highly embarrassing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know I kind of look at them as similar to like magic tricks. There's that famous magician James Randi's like a very prominent skeptic as well. And he sort of says like the difference between a scam and a magic trick is a magic trick. I'm going to tell you a lie and you're going to believe me, but we both know it's a lie.
Yeah.
Whereas with a fraud, you're going to lie to me and I'm not going to tell you. And the feeling afterwards is very different. Like you'll laugh about a magic trick or maybe you'll like find it interesting or something. But for a fraud, it's utter, it's hollow. Like, how could I be so stupid? That self-loathing must really,
Yeah.
flow within those people. And we don't help by calling it things like pig butchering. We don't help by putting a stigma to it. We need to allow people to come forward and say, okay, right, you've had money stolen from you. Okay, these guys are clever. They know what they're doing. They target you for specific reasons. In the case of fund recovery, they've got you already. Like, you're desperate. You acted fast, like, because you felt you had to.
Yeah.
I think it would go a long way for people to, take this off them and say, okay, all right, it's a problem, but we can solve it, right? And it's not the end of the world. We can deal with it. But again, that's very little consolation to people who have lost large amounts of money.
Yeah.
But at least maybe the people who can help come forward and offer information and cooperate with people to sort of like shut these guys down will be a little bit more forthcoming.
Yeah. As we wrap up here, you mentioned some blockchain abuse websites, but you did not provide any specifics. Can you provide a couple specific ones that we can add to the show notes so people can
Yeah,
go, if they're
absolutely.
interested in checking out an address, they can do that?
Okay, so Crystal, we offer a blockchain explorer on our website. You won't get any reputation about addresses there, but you can report abuse of addresses to us directly. There's a button on the website. You'll have to browse and find it, but it's there. There are also bitcoinabuse.com, which is for reporting Bitcoin abuse addresses. It is a competitor's product, but I do like it myself. I think it's a good initiative. There's Chain Abuse, which is by TRM, which allows you to sign up for an account and report, the abuse of various addresses on the blockchain. There are various other formats and forms to do that. What I'd say is, though, by offering this information directly to a blockchain analytics provider, whoever it might be, you get that one step closer. And if we go back to what we said before about, that flow of funds, like raise, store, move, spend, if at the spend phase, if at the stage where the criminal goes to convert the money to from cryptocurrency to fiat, if it's known that the address that they received the money from was used in a fraud and the exchange at the other end sees that, they can freeze the account. Like, they will file a suspicious transaction report. And maybe that's just one step closer to catching the people who are doing this. And they're not invincible. They're not immune to this. They will get caught and their day is coming. And I really hope to speed that up. But we really need people to get forward and volunteer that information. Particularly, these are the addresses that they used to take the money from us. These are the websites that they used. If we can link those two pieces of information together, we can absolutely have a much bigger impact on these guys, because you take away their payment infrastructure, and without that, they aren't able to do what they do. Or in the other side, we can freeze the funds on the exchanges when they come to cash it out, and they're stuck. They can't do anything about it. They've just wasted all their time and resources.
So I think that's good because it makes me think of, I periodically get the random sextortion email, and it contains a wallet address. I need to be in the habit of, whenever I get one of those emails, report the wallet address.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of mail screening providers do offer that information as well, right? So a lot of that is sent and added to those chain abuse sites, or is even like packaged up and sent out. But what's nice, if you think about a blockchain, just like an outside the box example, imagine a blockchain as an aerial photograph, right? As in, like, you're looking down on space on the ground, and you can see there are buildings, you can see there are roads, you can see there are rivers and trees and whatever else. What a blockchain analytics tool does is it says, okay, that building there, that's the bank, that's another bank, that's the shops, that's this, that's that. Like, we label those parts. What you can do as individuals, you can help us label the other buildings,
Yeah.
right? Because you see them, you say, oh, that's like a really shady bit of town, and you can put a pin in that, and we can say, okay, anything that comes from there, any cars that drive from that road to the bank, we want to know who's driving them. And like, that's how this works properly. It takes a community to sort of shut this down. We can do a lot that we do at the moment, but we are, a team. We are a small team compared to like the enormity of the people we're fighting against. However, if everybody reports out every single time they have a scam or a fraud that happens to them, that address gets reported. We get one more point on the chain, or one more marker for our clients and law enforcement to sort of pursue them and say, okay, right, we know who they were. Now we can go after them properly. If at the least we can shut down their accounts or get it frozen, at best case we can get them sent to prison.
Awesome. If people want to find out more about you, where can they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. Like Nick Smart. There aren't that many of us, but I'm there. Also, you can go to crystalblockchain.com, which is our company website. We have blogs and insights. We wrote some really interesting stuff recently about the Bitslato seizures by the US government and other law enforcement agencies around the world. We also write bits and pieces every now and again. We've got a really exciting thing coming out soon on romance fraud more generally, which is quite interesting, including some material that we have obtained through leaks of a criminal's computer, which we found. So like a script they would use for romance fraud, quite interesting. And yeah, just generally around. Sometimes in the crypto media myself, I've been on a few publications there, but more than happy to sort of entertain a conversation. If people have general questions, just shoot us an email and we can talk.
Great. Nick, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's great being here.